So, Erin Cox, you are known for your wonderful weaving skills.
Then one day I saw some video of someone weaving with a plant, and I happened to be at a campground that had that plant. And I was like, all right, let's try this. And it was this kind of mind-opening experience of I can gather craft supplies while spending time communing with nature, with being out in nature, with learning the plants and celebrating what they're good at and what their strengths are in a way that I'd never even looked at plants before.
So, Erin Cox, you are known for your wonderful weaving skills, and you've been developing all of this since late 2022. And since then, you've endeavored to, share your craft and your skills and your knowledge with the world. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you.
Oh, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So, what got you into, weaving and basketry and all that stuff?
I think it was kind of a perfect situation that happened. I have always been outdoorsy. Maybe I'm not a huge hiker or a mountain summiter, but I love to wander in the woods. And I've always been really curious about what are the plants that are growing. And then one day I saw some video of someone weaving with a plant, and I happened to be at a campground that had that plant. And I was like, all right, let's try this. It was trailing blackberry, our native blackberry. And I asked the camp owners if I could gather some, and they said sure. And so I wove my first little basket. And it's really sweet because they actually still have it in a little case. And they're like, we remember when your baskets looked like this. And it was this kind of mind-opening experience of I can gather craft supplies while spending time communing with nature, with being out in nature, with learning the plants and celebrating what they're good at and what their strengths are in a way that I'd never even looked at plants before. I mean, I grew up on a farm and we have a lovely garden in our urban home, but never thought of them as creating baskets. And so it has just become this journey to learn as many plants as I can and understand them and how they grow, and then to make neat things with them.
I think the whole harvesting things out in nature, communing with nature, like you said, is huge. At least for me as a kid, I would walk around the backyard and I'd pick up sticks and I'd poke things and I'd collect stuff. And there's just something really primally satisfying about being able to touch and feel and, make stuff and interact. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I've always been a poker. I'll always poke the sea anemone or something when I'm at the beach. But I also like it. It is the collecting. I've always been a bit of a gatherer. There's hunter-gatherers, and I'm the gatherer. Whether it was harvesting in our garden when things became ripe, or I would go out on walks, and I would always come home with stuff in my pockets or things in my hair. And now I am looking, like I said, about plants in just a completely different way. And it becomes a fun game almost to get to know what's around me that I ignored before. I remember when I first started and I learned about weaving with willow. And I was like, oh, we don't have any willow in Washington. There's no willow here. It's all pine trees, and I'm never going to find any willow. And then I learned about willow, and we have so
It's everywhere.
much willow. It's everywhere. And now I can drive down the street and be like, willow, 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 willow. And I didn't even know it was there. Like, here I am as a person who thought I kind of knew plants or knew my environment, and it was all just green. And now I'm seeing each plant for itself and learning way beyond just what I can weave with. I don't stop there, and it's been such a fun journey in that way.
It's really funny, once you learn how to identify a plant, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Just because, plants look different times of year, different stages of life and growth, and you don't always know what to look for. But once you do, like you said, you'll start seeing it everywhere. It's crazy.
I'm really honored when I see a student again. I will teach a class about harvesting, or we'll work with a material in class, and I'll explain where it grows and when it grows and when you harvest it. And then the next time I see them, they're like, I found it. And I'm watching it, and I know it's seasonal, and I know next August I'm going to have a new plant friend. And I just love to hear that, because it was something in their world that they had never noticed before.
I feel like, at least in modern day, A lot of these skills are lost. People don't really go outside much. They're confined inside, and their knowledge of the outside is limited. Growing up, or people who live in the Pacific Northwest, they can probably identify blackberries because of the brambles and maybe a couple of trees here and there, but that misses out on so many other things that are native to the area that truly live everywhere and are just as important, but are often overlooked.
And I try not to take for granted the history that I have with plants, and really encourage people to, when I give you something in class, look at it, touch it. How did it grow? Does it have a rib in it? Does it have leaves? Does it have stems? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Because I think we just kind of, like I said, it just is all green. It's just a plant. And so, and that it doesn't have to be big plants. It can be daffodils and dandelions, and we can weave with these urban plants just as much as we can weave with wetland plants. And trying to take down that mentality of only these certain things can you weave with. And also, people have never really looked at the baskets in their homes. What are they made of? People love baskets, collect baskets, inherit baskets. But what are they made of? And they're all going to be made of whatever is the most versatile, prevalent plant in their ecosystem. Like every culture has figured it out, and it's all about what's growing in their environment. And so I may introduce students to all kinds of plants, but I'm really encouraging, like, what's the one in your garden? What's the one in your community or your neighbor's garden that you can get to know? And then it makes it a little bit more fun, and it's more about kind of connection to place and celebrating that material because you saw it grow, you picked it, and then you made something with it. You didn't just buy it online.
Right.
I think is a special part of it, that you could go buy materials online and make baskets, and they're lovely baskets. They still basket, put stuff in them. They're great. But what happens when it came from your yard, or it came from your local community, or you learned about where it grows and how it grows and that the sun was on it? Makes it that much more special. And for me, being the gatherer, like I'm a lot of times the gatherer for my students because they don't have access to land or don't know how to gain permission to landowners to be able to gather. I'm trying to bring that to them and share that experience of where I gathered it and when I did it and the sunshine that was on it, and pass that on to students.
The power of artisan crafts, I always thought, was in the story. The quality, of course, too, but it's in the story. Like, locally sourced ingredients or materials, the time and effort that a skilled artisan puts into it, the story of the creation of the thing, and now you have both the item and the history behind it, as opposed to buying a basket online at Target. It's one of 200,000 in a lot. There's something unique and special to it.
Yeah, I've been working with our non-native narrow-leaf cattail. So I love to work with non-natives. I'll work with natives. I'll work with introduced. I'm very hesitant to call things invasive. They're just doing their best plant thing. And a lot of times they're not going to go anywhere. They're here. They live with us now. And so I was using a lot of cattail, and I finally found a really lovely place to gather cattail. And it was out, cattail loves to have wet feet. And so it was a little bit marshy, and I had kind of stomped my way out there, found this like sea of cattail. And I gathered some and I sat down to separate them and look through each one. And the sun was lovely. There was birds on the horizon. And I am just crying, sitting in this field, feeling like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be right now. And also being so grateful that this beautiful material is just sprung forth from the earth. And I'm going to get to share that with people for the next 6 to 9 months. If I take care of this, and if I harvest correctly, this cattail is going to keep giving to me for years. And maybe someday I can even bring others out to the space. And that will always be a really special memory of just being like, wow, I am exactly where I'm meant to be.
Man, if we should all be so lucky. That's such a really fun and grounding moment for you. I've had stuff similar to that in my, photography journey and stuff like that, but it's moments like that to where you really know that you found your calling, you found the thing that brings you joy, especially when you want to share that excitement and that moment with others too. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I have parks that I go to. In the city of Seattle and the city of Shoreline, you're not allowed to remove any plant vegetative materials, so I don't. But at the Shoreline or at a community college near me, there I'm just walking around, just checking out what's growing there, and there is a giant ponderosa pine. And at some point over the summer, a big limb had come down. And it was like I walked around a corner and there it was. And I was like, oh. Pine needles are one of my favorite things to work with. And you want long pine needles, and ponderosas are really good at that and make beautiful needles. And here's this branch that had already fallen down. I was able to gather directly from the tree. And pine needles are not something I'm going to worry about gathering as an urban forager. Yeah. They naturally fall to the ground. They're replenishable. And so I had this like treasure of plants. And I've since then shared with some of my students. I'm like, go gather, let that tree give to you.
Yeah.
Because eventually the college is going to come chop it up and it's going to become mulch. But oftentimes I'm wandering around and I'm just looking and then just,
you find something. Yeah.
Find something amazing. And sometimes that means I go back and find who the landowner is and I talk to them. Another story of a tree is I will stalk trees on the internet. In many cities, you can find tree maps, especially of kind of special species or large trees. And I found a tree map of North Seattle, and I kind of tracked down this one tree. And it was in a yard that was fully fenced off, and I didn't feel comfortable, going through the gate or knocking on the door. I realized that as a smallish white woman, I'm not terribly scary. But I decided to send a letter to the address. I sent a letter. I had pictures of what I do and that I wanted to gather pine needles. And I'm pretty sure the day he got that in the mail, he texted me and was like, yes, let's talk about this. So I go over and it is a beautiful tree. I mean, it's just, and I'm so excited. And he brings me in and he shows me the tree that he loves to rake up the needles, and he hadn't raked up the needles. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a gift. Thank you so much. And I start to gather pine needles. And he was definitely a little disappointed that I brought a shoebox and not a garbage bag. He really wanted me to take home needles. Yeah. But now, ever since, I've taken groups to his yard, and he always has like water or lemonade for us. He brings us little knee pads, and he's just so tickled to know that his tree, something that he didn't see as a value in that way, is making so many other people happy. Yeah. And I think that has been really fun about the kind of challenge of gathering and doing it in a sustainable, legal, with permission way, is I'm building community. Yes. In that way. The people who have the cattail are just like, you want what? And I was like, yes, I will be camping out there next year and gathering cattail. I have another woman that I was at a lake paddleboarding around. I just love to look for aquatic plants. There's a lot that I really like to weave with. And I was looking for a specific plant called bulrush, which this hat is almost all bulrush. We don't have a lot of it in Western Washington. There used to be more. And I saw bulrush around the lake. And so we got out our phone and we looked at what house owned that lakefront property. And then we got back out of the lake. We drove around and we found it, and I knocked on their door. And now I go back every year and I'm the basket lady. Yes. And I've made her a basket of bulrush. And the last time she was there, she had friends visiting from Germany and was like, come meet the basket lady. And it just become this lovely sharing thing. They didn't even know what the species of plant they had was. And now they look at it in a totally different way. Even if they're not using it or know how to use it, I get so excited and I celebrate it for them.
Yeah, but it's the story behind all of this. Now they get to share with their German friends, like, hey, this came from our backyard. Look what this thing has. here's the story and history behind that. And the community building aspect of what you do, I think, is absolutely amazing. Anything to connect people over a shared passion. And for a lot of the things that you mentioned, a lot of these resources were just going to get tossed anyway.
Yeah. I make friends with like camp steward or not camp stewards. I make friends with park stewards. So a lot of times city parks are managed or supported by a park steward. And that steward is kind of paying attention to what's going on in the park, what plants are thriving, what may not be thriving, what do we need to clear out. And I got in touch with some park stewards that had yellow flag iris, which is an invasive, noxious weed in the state of Washington and is encouraged to be controlled. You don't have to remove it yet, but you're supposed to control it. And they had narrow-leaf cattail. And so I got in touch with them. And so I just start volunteering at their cleanup days. Yeah. And instead of that going into the compost, it comes home with me.
Yeah.
And so I brought home yellow flag iris from there. One of the people that were working that day said, "Oh, we have yellow flag iris on our property. Would you like it?" And I said, "Yes." And then I brought like 6 other weavers with me who cleared out their yellow flag iris like patch. Okay. And I have the most amazing picture of them all just walking out with their big bundles of yellow flag iris and knowing that those went off to allow people to play with their hands and to learn about the plant. And that's that community stuff. And if I could bring more people to actually forage, that's like my dream, is finding spaces where we're welcomed to gather.
Yeah. So now that you foraged all of these things, how do you go about storing it? Where do you put it? How do you take care of it so it lasts long? Stuff like that.
I store it everywhere.
Okay.
My house looks like a hedge witch or an apothecary just covered in plants. I mean, one of the big things I try to think about is that I will only forage what I'll use, and I use what I forage. I'm not trying to make a stash or a cache of plants. I want to use them up before the next time they're available to me. Would they last for years? Absolutely. But one of my commitments is every time they come back into my life, I'll be ready to accept them into my weaving. And so when I think about what I'm gathering, I gather more now because I'm a business. But even as a forager, I really encourage to only gather what you think you can use in this season. Yeah. And I also really try to always use up everything I have. I don't want to ever throw anything away. Even if it is compost, that plant gave a lot of energy. I shared energy with it to bring it into my home. But almost all basketry material, and you can never say always or every.
There's always caveats.
There's always a caveat. You dry first and then rehydrate just enough to make it flexible to weave with. If you wove with things fresh, then you'd have all this loose, you'd have shrinkage and what you wove would be loose. So I have things drying everywhere. I have things drying from the ceiling. I have things drying on racks. I have things drying in bundles. I have things drying under my neighbor's deck. I have it everywhere that I can keep that plant safe from moisture, and being in the Pacific Northwest, that's my extra challenge. Now, weaving friends in the Southeast have to deal with a lot more bugs, but we give and take. So I have things everywhere, and you can't label enough. As much as you think you're going to remember what everything is, especially when you're getting started, you label everything. I have a plant Gantt. If people aren't familiar with what a Gantt chart is, it's the stacking up of this happens here, this happens there, this happens there for project management. And so I have that for my plants. What's coming into bloom now? What's growing now? What do I harvest in what month, to try to help me remember? And then also all the places that I've found to gather. I try to keep organized.
Okay.
Yeah.
This reminds me a lot of like survival crafting video games, to where like you have places marked on a map, you know where to go back. Mm-hmm. You have inventory management of how you're, storing and putting all these things.
I mean, any hunter-gatherer needs to know, however you track that, where did the deer go? Where do you find the rabbits? Where are the fish? Well, I happen to gather plants. And where are they growing, and what time is the right time to gather them? We have to carry that information with us. And there are a lot of incredible books out there. And I hope that with the students that I work with and the people that I work with, I want to share that as well. Like, I don't want to keep that to myself. I'm not trying to have just, I don't sell my material that I gather. I'm just using it to pass that knowledge on to others, and so that they can work with the real thing. That kind of environmental knowledge is super important in this craft.
So on the topic of, storing, how do you go about color preservation so that things don't all just turn into some shade of brown, although
They pretty much all do turn into some shade of brown. But I think that there's something to be said for people who weave with natural materials is you just get really excited about light brown, dark brown, 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 green, yellow, brown, yellow, green. And you just celebrate what it is, or even spots on the leaves. They will all eventually turn a little bit brown. And that's pretty common. I know in some crafts that you can dye things, but plant materials don't take a lot of natural dyes well. Usually natural dye with animal products, so like wool or leather, they absorb dye better than plant matter does. So everything that I work with is whatever the natural color of that plant was. There are a few things that I'm going to play with in the coming year where you can dye with like black walnut or with iron and things like that I'd like to play with. But for the most part, I just celebrate whatever nature gave me.
So you collect a variety of species to give you options in color and, other properties, stiffness, rigidity, how well it, weaves together. And then from that, you get to, design your crafts and kind of go about that process.
Honestly, there is nothing I've ever made that's new. It's all learned from all the people who came before me and from incredible teachers that I've gotten to work with, or books that were written 50 years ago about weaving, or tribal knowledge that I feel so lucky to get to use my hands to do some of the same things that have been done for millennia, is really special. So for me, it is having a kind of basic set of weaving skills, getting to know my material really well, and then letting them all come together. You can make a very simple basket with 2 skills of plaiting and twining, and then you can make a hat with the exact same skills. It's just knowing the material better and having confidence and having some understanding of how to build the structure. But like, you really just start picking up these little weaving skills and then, I hate to say it, weaving them together into something else. And a lot of that also comes from really knowing the plants. I know what a plant can and can't handle. How can I push it maybe a little further? And I do have to help students a lot. Like, these plants are stronger than you think. Like, you can weave them tightly. They have a lot of strength to offer you. Don't be shy to ask more of the plant. And I think we're all afraid of breaking things. And I always celebrate the first person who rips a weaver or breaks their spoke or whatever it is, because it's okay. We can fix it all.
Yeah.
And we're so afraid of that. And I like that in class, I'm like, nah, it's okay. We're going to play with it, and kind of let go of some of that fear, because the plants are a lot stronger than we give them credit for.
Yeah. So what is the process of making one of these items? So if you had to pick between one of the items that you brought with you today, like, how do you start it and how do you go about making it into what it is?
Some baskets, I have a very clear idea of what I want it to look like or what material I want to celebrate in that moment, or I'm just jonesing to work with something in particular. And then others, you kind of have to let them play out what they're going to be. For me, in my journey right now, a lot of it is, how can I create something that I can share with someone else? I actually, when I weave, a lot of times I'm thinking about, how would a new person experience this? How can I explain how to do this so that they can feel successful, and how to help their fingers learn a new skill? So a lot of my weaving is trying out, how can I pass this on to somebody else? And then when I weave for myself, when I'm creating something where it's more of a treat for me, it's usually because I have a plant that I want to get to know better. And so I'll get some friends, some plant friends that I know really well, and then maybe a couple that I don't use very often, and try to figure out how can I make them play together. And make something. And depending on the material, sometimes I'll use a form to weave on. I think we don't see that enough in our Instagram and TikTok world. You just see these beautiful finished product, and you don't realize how wonky and a little ugly and a little scruffy it was all along the way until you present that finished product. But like when you watch a basket come together, there's pieces all over the place and it's big. And you use a form to help you create that shape before you see the final product. Okay. And so it's okay to kind of go through that ugly phase, which I think is also part of the journey of like, is this thing ever going to look good? And then it finally gets there.
I'm sure there's an analogy for life somewhere in there.
Oh, absolutely. You show up in life like you show up weaving a basket, 100%.
Okay. And by form, so you mean like if I'm building a basket, let's say I have a ball or something, and then I form the basket around that so it keeps shape?
Yeah. A lot of, specifically working with soft fibers, things like cattails and bulrush and daylily and daffodil stems and all these kind of soft leaves versus sticks like willow or hazel or things like that. You use a form because plants do this really cool thing where they keep the shape that they dry in. And so if I give them that shape to dry in, they'll keep that shape. And just like hat makers, they use forms to build a hat on. You would do the same for a basket. And in some cultures, those forms are passed down through generations because it's that family's special shape. Or you might have like Haida weavers in the North Pacific Northwest working with cedar and the shape of their hat, and those forms are passed down through generations. And so you can use anything to be a form, but sometimes forms become really, really special and really meaningful. So for a lot of these, you'll start with this particular shape that you're trying to encourage the plants to bend to.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing on forms. I didn't think about that. There's so much cultural heritage built into these crafts and this artistry that goes back, generations and generations, hundreds, thousands of years, even further. That's really, really cool.
I barely know my basket history. I'll be the first to admit that I am a neophyte when it comes to learning basket history. But like, I know I've read books about people who can look at an ancient basket and tell whether they were a master or a beginner. They can tell where one weaver stopped and another weaver started. And they can even show where all of a sudden a new technique was brought into, say, a tribal weave that was from a tribe somewhere else in the country, and they had clearly come together at some point and shared weaving knowledge, and then they both went back and introduced that into their weaving. And I'm just like,
it's so cool.
And it still happens all the time. I'll have a friend come over who's a weaver, and she'll do it one way, and I'm like, I never even thought to do it that way. And so having that humbling of there is no right way to do this. And it is interesting when I work with students too about like, am I doing this right? And they're like, it's fine. It's going to be great. And can I splice like this? Can I do this? Of course, give it a try. I think we're also very trained, but it has to be done in a certain way. And when you're learning skills like this, you could do it one way for 10 years, and then all of a sudden you're going to learn a new way to do it. Or you're going to find a new teacher that does it in a different way. And that's something that I'm always trying to be humble about is this is the way I do it, but please drop it if it doesn't work for you. Yeah. If you find another teacher that can teach you in a different way that your brain understands better, or when I'm talking about a specific plant, I'm like, these are the plants that I've fallen in love with, but you may fall in love with a completely different plant. There's one that's really common around here called crocosmia. It looks very tropical, looks like a bit of a bird of paradise, but it's grows here easily. And for the last 2 years, I've been like, crocosmia leaves. I don't know if I... And like this year, I'm like, no, I'm going to fall in love with crocosmia because it's everywhere. And right, like, I feel like that's what weavers did. They said, I've got this thing that's everywhere. What can I do with it? And then they made something amazing. So stay tuned. I'm gonna find the perfect way to use crocosmia.
Very excited to hear about your journeys. But speaking of passing on knowledge, you teach a variety of classes. I got to attend one of yours. It's fantastic. What kind of classes do you teach, and what are some of your favorites?
When I first started teaching, I definitely felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I do think it's a pretty common for anyone who begins, especially teaching, because we have this cultural expectation that I have to be an expert before I can teach. And I felt that for quite a while, that I'm not good enough. I don't know this craft inside and out. But if I waited till I did, I'd be 80 and I'm not going to want to teach anymore. So I feel like I have a really strong base. I'm always willing to learn myself. I feel like I have a kindness and an appreciation for what it's like to be new. So when I'm teaching, that all comes into play, and I allow myself to recognize that I don't have to know how to do everything, but I'm going to just dive in and start sharing what I've learned. Because if I wait, when will the time ever be right to teach? So I've been teaching a lot of classes, all with materials that I can gather with my own hands here in the Pacific Northwest. I try as hard as I can not to buy anything, so I don't purchase any weaving material. I mean, I don't know how to make scissors. So I do buy those, but all the material in class has been gathered by these two hands at some point. And so sometimes when I talk about classes, I talk about when this class actually started. Could have been last year when I gathered that material on some April day a year ago, so that you could use it now today. So those classes come from everything from small soft fiber woven classes to tiny. I do a fairy basket class that I really like because people want to go small. Small is fun, but small doesn't necessarily mean easier. I'll do classes on pine needle basketry. With this basket is a pine needle basket. It's called coil basketry, and every culture in the world has figured out coil basketry. It's just what makes up that coil changes, again, based on what was in their environment. I'd like to do some more artistic, kind of wild, weird things that don't actually make necessarily a basket, and that's okay. And I think it's because I want to give students exposure to as many different plants as I can, because maybe they have access to something, or one particular plant will speak to them. And we'll do different things like stars and, wall pieces. And a big reason that so my business name is Field and Forest Crafts, because I gather things in fields and forests all over the Pacific Northwest. But I didn't call it Field and Forest Baskets. I think wild crafting is much more inclusive and welcoming of people, and a little less scary than I have to make a basket. And so I wanted to just open the door for anything that's crafted from nature, anything that's crafted from the wild. And I also would love to bring in others who do things with wild plants, whether that's making tinctures or doing art or dyeing with mushrooms. There's all these cool things in the world that I would love to bring in, kind of under that umbrella of celebrating our fields and our forests, and hopefully encouraging people to get out into them and see what's out there. So anything's on the docket. If I can teach myself how to do it and I can help a student learn how to do it, it might show up.
Yeah, I think based on the name, it's really important to, be flexible and not try to confine yourself to one area. I named my photography company Jason Sir Media as opposed to Jason Sir Photography, so I can expand into photography, videography, any other art form I decide to want to do, because my name's not going to change, and media is very, very generous and inclusive, so I understand.
Yeah, and it's craft. People get a little held up on weaving or basketry, and I'm like, no, we're just gonna play. We're just gonna craft together.
Yeah.
And that to me speaks a lot more to me about playing with plants and bringing nature into our hands than having a very specific outcome of basketry.
I think that mindset that you bring as a teacher is paramount. The, ability to play, there are no wrong answers, go try things, push limits, test stuff, break things. This is all okay. And having that permission from a student's perspective it really opens the door for them to, try new things, let their curiosity take them where they want to go, experiment. They might have an hypothesis. You try it, it doesn't work out, and that's fine. It's a really wonderful mindset to have.
I am so honored when a student comes back and either brings something they've made outside of class to the next class and wants to share it with me. I get photos from students of like, look what I made, or I gathered this, or I get text messages from phone numbers that I don't know because I give out my phone number, but I don't have all my students' phone numbers, of random shrubs of, can I weave with this? And I'm happy to answer those questions, but a lot of times my answer is, I don't know. Why don't you give it a try?
Yeah.
And maybe you'll have some luck. Maybe you'll fall in love with a new plant.
So we talked about your business and we talked about the classes. What are some plans that you have both personal and professionally going forward?
Teaching is hard. Teaching takes a lot of energy, and I'm a pretty energetic person, but I also know that I'll never be able to teach 7 days a week, 5 days a week, 3 days a week. It's hard, and I'm very hands-on. So I want to start thinking about ways that I can take what I'm doing kind of outside of the classroom, and also potentially with bigger groups of people, because when I'm working on something intricate, I have maybe 6, 8, 10 students at most, and I'm at my limit. But what could I do to bring it out into a bigger community to start to see these things, like I said, in community. So for me, one of those is working a lot more with living structures.
Okay.
I find them just fascinating that we can bend and shape plants to look like things, or to create spaces, or to create a destination almost. So one of the things that I've been working on for about a year is convincing a farm that they do indeed want to grow willow. And so we're going to be starting this year, we're going to start to do some living willow structures. And willow is my probably heart plant. I absolutely adore willow. It is one of the most resilient plants. The fact that it can weather floods and drought and storms and be on rivers and hold them in place against the rushing water, and that all you have to do is take a clipping and shove it in the ground at the right time of year and it'll grow, is so cool. Yeah. And that it can grow 15 feet in a year.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And you can gather it and it'll grow back every year. You can work with the bark, you can work with the sticks, you can do all these wonderful things. So I absolutely love willow. And so working with living willow structures, and whether it makes it into the cut or not, but as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of willow in Washington. Yeah. So it's not that hard for me to source local willow, native willow, to build structures. And so we're going to build arches and obelisks and living fences, which is a new word that a lot of people don't know, but a fence and a hedge is a fedge, which I think is a great word. I can't wait to build fedges, and then those plants will continue to grow, and we'll weave them back into each other, or we'll harvest the rods that come off of it to make other things. And that's kind of one of the areas of farming having willow, is that it then generates materials that you may need in other places on the farm, whether you're making trellises or cloches or different ways to do some plant supports. We're adding that into this farm's production, and also making really cool structures that I can invite others to come play with while we make them, and then spend an afternoon reading a book in the dappled shade under the willow. It just seems so perfect.
I mean, I think building destinations, like you mentioned earlier, is a really cool concept. I know a bunch of farms, they obviously do the farm thing, they produce things from the land. But there's a lot of photography opportunities that people can have there. Look at these fields of lavender. Or if you build a living structure like willow, and if it grows 15 feet in a year, that means you can have something really nice in just 2 to 3 years. I think that's a wonderful idea.
And it's a commitment, right? Like I'm making I think about the willow, and the willow's like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to plant me? Because we need to understand each other. If I get planted here, I'm going to do my willow thing, which is grow like crazy. which means I have a relationship with that structure for years to come of caring for it, grooming it, preparing it. Otherwise, it's going to do what it does and turn into a giant tree, shrub, hedge, whatever it is. And so it's a little bit scary to know that, like, okay, I'm locking into a long-term relationship with this willow. I also have a willow farm that I started actually now it's 2025. I started it in 2024. I planted in March, and I will harvest in this month. What is this month? January.
Yeah.
So you harvest it so I planted in early spring, and then you harvest willow in the deep winter, which for this hemisphere is usually, December, January, February, before it starts to bud out again. And so I'll be doing my first inaugural willow farm harvest, which is pretty exciting. And that's another one where I've come into a relationship with that willow for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And I hope to pass it on to someone when I can no longer gather it myself because I've aged out of the journey. I hope that it gets passed on to someone else who can then make beautiful things with it. But my farm is a big part of my kind of future plan in working with willow, is that I have to be willing to grow it, to weave with it. And it takes several years to mature so that I can actually have the rods to weave with. So it's a long-term,
it's a commitment.
I'll make some baskets in a few years. But I love seeing it grow, and it just blows my mind that you can shove a 12-foot stick into the ground in March, and now I have 8 or 10 rods from each one of those sticks that are 4 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And it's going to do that every year for 20 years if I take care of it.
Okay.
I mean, no fertilizer, no tilling.
Just shove it in, forget about it for a little bit.
What a cool plant. So my willow farm is a big part of this. Growing the living willow structures, I think, is going to be a really neat way for people to experience and see plants in a way we don't see these anymore. With a lot of crafts, they come and go, and there's spikes and times when you see more of them. But we haven't seen a lot of willow structures in probably 2 decades. And I'm excited to introduce that back. There's even, historically, they even say that some of the Baroque cathedrals where the architecture was kind of built upon living willow structures. And you're like, what?
Yeah, that's really cool.
I read very nerdy willow books.
That's fine.
And that one of the first walls of China was actually willow because it grew so fast and so dense that people couldn't get through it. I mean, willow. Everything.
These natural resources are so cool, and I feel like it's, at least in modern day society, a lot of these techniques and these art forms and just the history and knowledge around it, it gets lost. Because, we've replaced fences with, metal.
Barbed wire.
Yep.
And I understand why we did it, right? Like, there were not enough trees in the Midwest or in the plains to fence what we wanted to fence in. So what did we do? We made barbed wire fencing. But so many of the things that we make with plastic now or metal now were plants. Everything from, they used to use bulrush, which I mentioned on the hat as one of my favorite wetland plants. They used to use bulrush in between the staves of barrels to serve as a gasket.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
And then we replaced that with something man-made when nature worked, but it didn't last forever. And we wanted things to last forever. And now we're in trouble because everything lasts forever.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem, isn't it?
Right? Like baskets, everybody used to have a basket. You would have multiple baskets to go to the store, to gather your groceries, to gather your vegetables, to take laundry to the laundry. And then we learned about wooden crates replace baskets because we came to a country that had all the trees we could ever want. So making wooden crates, sure, it was fast, it was easy, you didn't need skill, you could pretty much do it with a machine because all baskets, even to this day, if you pick up a basket, a human has woven it. Yeah. Machines don't do that yet. And so we lost baskets to crates, and then cardboard came around.
Corrugated cardboard.
Corrugated cardboard
Yep.
became the box, and then the plastic bag came. And all those things last a really pretty long time, especially that plastic bag. But back in the day, you would have a basket, and then you would have to take it to get it repaired by someone or get a new basket when it wore out. And we just don't have that anymore. And this idea that everything has to last forever, I really like pushing that envelope, that I will work on something really, really hard, but I know that this is going to start to break down in a few years. But I also know I can throw it out in the woods and it's going to go back to nature.
Yes.
And so that impermanence has been part of this too, is I don't use any glues or plastics. I really want to know that like this can go back to the earth when I'm done. And that brings me a lot of joy, and I get to let go of some things, of this expectation that I have to preserve something or keep something sacred for so long. I can let it go and I can make a new one. All the way down to my clothing. I'm trying to have less plastic in my clothing, knowing that I can compost my clothes if I try. I'm trying. It's not easy. But yeah, it's kind of amazing to think, to let go of that. Everything has to be permanent and everything has to last forever. It doesn't. Enjoy it while you have it.
I know that at least there are small groups that I'm a part of in modern society that they like that impermanence. We like the sustainability. There's beauty in the impermanence, right? Having things return to its source once it served its purpose, and that is okay. And embracing that is a really, really nice mindset to have. So I appreciate that. So a closing tradition that we have on the show.
What, really?
Yeah,
Oh.
I know. I'm so sorry.
I hope I said good things.
You said great things. But a closing tradition that we have on the show is the previous guest leaves a question for the current guest, not knowing who the current guest may be. And the question that's left for you is, if you can go back 10 years and tell yourself something, what would you tell them?
Oh gosh. I have 100 times thought, man, I wish I found this sooner. Yeah. I already feel it in my body as I'm aging, and on my hands and gathering and getting out in the woods. I think it would be to Erin, to turn your creativity to something sustainable. Turn your creativity into something that allows you to celebrate both the raw material and the finished. It was always about the finished product and not the journey. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's so much the journey.
Yeah.
It sounds so cliche, but everything I make is made so much more special by the journey of gathering. And I've been creative my whole life. And I think when I was creative in the past, it was very much about the destination, the finished thing, whether I sold it to someone or I gave it to someone. And now so much of the joy of the finished product is the journey that got me the materials to even bring those materials together. The journey of learning from other teachers. I am so appreciative in the kind of community of weavers, how much credit and honor is given to those who have taught you. And it is super common to list every teacher you've ever had on your bio, on your website, whatever it is, because this, like many true crafts, you have to learn, you've got to have a guide, and giving honor to those guides has been something that's stuck with me a lot. So they're part of that journey too. So all around, I would tell Erin from 10 years ago, think about the journey, not just the destination, and how can you make that as joyful and meaningful as possible.
It's so funny how true a lot of these cliches that we've been beating over the head with here for years. There's so much truth to it and power to it, and the definition of a cliche, like, it's very easy to ignore because it's said all the time, but there's a reason why it's said all the time. And I feel like only when you get to a point in your life where you have enough age and wisdom can you really appreciate that.
And we think we're so unique. We
Oh,
think we're so
absolutely.
different that it's not going to be us, and it 100% is us. And I think part of this too is like, I love thinking about all the people who have done this before.
Yeah.
It's fun to think about, like, people have sat around and done these techniques and these things with their hands for so many years, and I'm part of that. And I could just make pretty things and take pictures and put them on the internet, but I teach because I want others to be able to celebrate it too and to enjoy it too, and to see behind the photograph of how did it come to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of why I like to teach. And one thing, like, I want to share, and I don't know if it will resonate with this talk or not, but in this process, I've had to slow down a lot. And I found basketry during a really hard time for my family, and caring for someone else. And it was a way for me to care for myself, and to care for the plants, and to have something to celebrate and look forward to. And I've had to give myself a lot of patience because it's a big learning curve. And one thing that always resonated with me, I don't know who said it or where it was first said, but to accept the seasonality of all things, including myself. And I have loved that I have created a connection with the seasonality of the Pacific Northwest, the seasonality of the plants, and also my seasonality. Like, there are going to be times where I am vibrant and full of life, and there are going to be other seasons where I'm calming down and I'm taking things down into my roots and hibernating and trying to give myself space for that. And the plants absolutely remind me that they'll come spring again. I'll get to see the daffodils again. I'll get to see the bulrush rising. I'll get to see all of that. So celebrating the seasonality of all things, including myself, has been really meaningful to me.
That resonates very deeply with me, because, I feel like in modern society, the hustle culture is there. You have to be running at full tilt forever and always. And that's just, frankly, it's not sustainable. You will burn out, issues, mental health, physical health. It wears and takes its toll on you. But understanding that there are seasons to your life, there are highs and there are lows, and it's perfectly natural and part of the cycle. It's really refreshing, and I think it'll help keep people grounded, myself included.
Yeah, and as a maker, whether you're making digital or making hands-on, you feel this pressure to create. I do. I should speak in I statements. I
do
feel
too.
pressure to create or to use this, or someone will ask me, "Hey, Erin, have you ever made that?" And I'll feel this pressure. Or, "Erin, can you teach that class?" And I have to remember, it's not the right season for that yet, and there will be more seasons. And so I keep coming back to it and being like, "It's okay, Erin. There'll be another season for that," and being kind to myself in that journey.
Super important to be
Yeah.
kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Before we go, where would you like to draw people's attention to, and where can people find you?
Well, I'd like to draw people's attention to the world around them. First and foremost, start looking at plants. But you can find me. I feel like my website is a great place to go, which is fieldandforestcrafts.com. Also on Instagram. I'm still learning that whole Instagram thing, so be kind. But I really try to share true photos of what it really looks like to be making things. It's not super duper crafted or perfect. And I hope that they can see interesting things there. And I also really believe in coming and learning. I think we love to collect pins on Pinterest of things you want to do and save videos of things you might want to do in the future. But to find me, come learn. That's really where I shine. Instead of making content for the internet, come learn with me. Come push yourself out of your comfort zone. You're going to make a cute basket, I promise. And just come learn. Come spend time in community, is how you really find Erin. That's where I'm at.
Cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. The values that you hold align very, very closely with mine. It is okay to try new things. It is okay to make mistakes. There's so much power in community, and I think the most important thing someone can do with their time is teach. So, sounds like you embody all of those values too. Um, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I can't wait to meet Erin 20 years from now.
Me too.
I hope I'm weird and covered in plants and like living in the woods. That's my dream.
Very on brand.
Yes, very on brand.
Well, Erin, thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you. Take care.